When trying to reach English fluency, a lot of English language learners are surprised to find that they spent only 20% of the time they will ever spend learning the language just to get to the low advanced levels. Going from low advanced to fluent is going to take 80% of the time, just about, for most people, to get all the way to fluency. And this is because just the nature of what you're studying is different. It's much deeper, it's more complex, it's got a lot more intricacies. For example, you're going to be working on getting comfortable with your English skills, and that means deepening the words that you do know and connecting them to other words, refining your grammar, and getting comfortable with it. You're not going to be learning grammar all the way through the advanced levels, but you're going to get to where you make it more of a habit than something that you just know this is the pattern.
It's things like loosening your tongue and expanding your vocabulary into jargon at different contexts, making connections between words. It's leveling your different skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. It's leveling them out to where they're a little bit more equitable. Another thing is venturing into new context or formalities. So you may not be familiar with an area and you go into that and you find that you need to have that in order to be more fluent. And ultimately just building out this solid cultural background knowledge of English to kind of help you as you progress.
And this is a really rewarding process. It's a lot of work, but it's a really rewarding process if you stick with it. We've got some tips for you today on how to make this process a bit more efficient because, let's be honest, it takes a lot of time and effort.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to Waiguo Friends English. The number one way for you to make studying English more efficient is to lessen the number of words that you study each week. We've said this time and time again on this channel because it's extremely important and it's counterintuitive that as you go up to the advanced levels, you actually find more words that you didn't know existed. And so with these more words, we're tempted to try to expand the amount of vocabulary building that we try to do, but that is not going to be more efficient. What you need to do is focus on 5 to 10 words a week max to try to get more understanding so that you can apply those, make connections with them, and most importantly, actually use them.
In vocabulary learning in the higher levels, you are going to be focusing on tying those words to words that you already know. You're going to be working on tying synonyms together that maybe you didn't know were synonyms, or maybe you thought were just a little related, but really they're deeply related. There's all kinds of things that you can unpack when you actually reduce the amount of words that you're trying to memorize and just focus on them. What do they actually mean? Where did they come from? What do we think? What is the picture that comes to an American's mind when we try to use that word? For example, which words do we actually use in which context and around what people, or when we're feeling certain ways? Like, what do we actually use those words for, and do we use them? Are they common or are they not common? Are they common in certain contexts versus others? There's so much you can unpack here, but these are all things that you probably glossed over before when you were trying to remember 20 words in a week or 30 words in a week. Some people are going for 100 words in a week. Yes, you can do that by breaking a word down into its parts using prefixes and suffixes, but it's just a surface level understanding. If you're really wanting to gain fluency and flexibility in a language, flexibility of expression, you need to go deep. That means connecting all the things that you have already learned up to this point and really leaning on the knowledge you already have in order to expand your knowledge.
We actually have a video talking about this a little bit more in depth, which you can check out here. In that video, we actually give a free PDF of Advanced English Vocabulary Guide and break that down how to use it so that hopefully you can do this process and you can slow down and focus in on these new vocabulary words.
Tip number 2 to making English learning a lot more efficient in the advanced levels is get involved in a place or in a program that forces you to use English a lot and in all the different skills if possible. I know for a lot of you guys, maybe it's just going to be the English corner down the road that meets once a week and that's what you have. I would suggest that you also find something online that gets you speaking and reading and writing English as much as possible. The thing is like practice makes better. Okay, it doesn't make perfect, but it makes better. The more you do it, the faster your brain and what knowledge you have up here that you recognize when you see a word is going to connect to your mouth and get you to actually speaking. And for those of you who are really good at speaking, but you're really slow at reading and writing, you've got to speed that up too. Getting that connection so where you are a bit more fluent in the way that you work with these words and the way that you recognize these words and the ways that you can just recall them and use them on the spot, it takes practice. You've got to be actually using the language, and once a week is not going to cut it. Twice a week is not going to cut it. You've got to be doing this ideally every single day. Ideally, you are living the language, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, you cannot just watch YouTube videos and expect to be fluent. We've actually met quite a few students that have spent a lot of time on YouTube and their English is surprisingly good. But if you really get down to it, a lot of those people had ways to get in-depth feedback. It wasn't just watching YouTube.
Right.
You're not just going to watch YouTube and be a perfect mechanic, a car mechanic that's top level, top notch. You're actually going to have to actually go out and do the things. You're going to have to practice working with cars. So too, with your English, you have to find ways that you can actually go out there and get that feedback from a real person to say, hey, that's not exactly quite right. It's more like this. That's what you really need, is to find those opportunities, even if you're not in an English-speaking country.
We actually provide this with our program, Fluency Fast Track. Our focus is to give lots of practice and lots of feedback and lots of opportunities to connect in all the different language skills. We really emphasize integrated skills. So you're not just going to read and write. You're going to read and listen and write and speak. You're going to do all of them just to complete one assignment or just to complete one course. We're going to be doing lots of things. This is something that we really craved when we were learning our languages, and it's something that would have made things so much faster. It would have been harder, but it would have been faster in another way. 30 days of doing that will get you far more than doing 6 months of just listening to YouTube.
The third way to make studying English more efficient is to live an English-speaking lifestyle. Yeah. Even if you are not an English-speaking country, you can find ways to just kind of live an English-speaking lifestyle, even in your own home.
This means like cooking recipes in English. This means playing games with your kids in English. This means finding ways to rest in English. Whatever you do for rest, whether it's watching TV or movies or playing board games or playing video games or whatever it is that you do, switch the language to English. Like, I know that seems dangerous for a lot of you, but if you are at the advanced level, you can handle most of the functional language you will come across in these contexts. So you just need to get to the point where you can turn off your brain and be taking in English. You need to be able to study without studying, essentially. And the only way you're going to do that is if you are able to just surround yourself like you're on an island, an English-speaking island in your own country. Like, your home should have plenty of English in it. It should not be, I do English in this hour, and that's it. You should have English bleeding into everything else, and that means a bit of a lifestyle change. So if your goal is fluency, if your goal is to get beyond functional fluency and be able to live in an English-speaking country very comfortably, you've got to be actively working to do that now, especially in the advanced levels. You've got to be shifting gears and getting yourself to where you are doing English just when you're not actually trying to study English.
Another way you can do this is to learn in English. That may sound kind of strange, but take a topic that you're already interested in. Use English as a medium for you to be able to actually learn that information. So whether it's an online course or a webinar or just some books, some resources, some electronic resources, try to use English as kind of a key, as a kind of portal in order to get that information. Don't rely on the translations. Don't rely on the translators in order to get the information from that book and get the information from that article. Go straight to the source, get it right from native English speakers, and then learn that information in English.
So if you're into photography, take a photography course. If you're into playing the guitar, take a guitar playing course, but get it from an English speaker so that you're listening to your hobby and your interest in English. Not only is that going to help you get exposed to more vocabulary words that you won't normally pick up in a Cambridge English book, but it's also something that's going to help you just have something to talk about in English. You would be able to have a connection with another American who loves guitar or photography. You'd be able to talk about that right away because you've taken the time to invest in learning in English. Though you don't have to actually make it a complete English study session. You don't have to really work at the language as much, but listen to those videos over and over again. That's the great thing about online things or a book. You can just do it over and over again until it really sinks in. You don't have to make it an intense study session.
The fourth way to make studying English more efficient is to read, write, listen, speak, record. You have to have a record of the things that you're doing. So many of the best English speakers that we have met, they have established actually their own system of tracking where they have been and where they are going. They record themselves. They have a way to be able to listen back to themselves. They can write something and they go back to their writing years later. That is an absolutely excellent idea for anyone to do in order to make their English language learning more efficient. Think about it like this. If you do some work, you spend an hour learning vocabulary. That's a long time. But what if you could make sure that you kept that hour's worth of time in your pocket so that every time for now to the future, you always have that hour learning of vocabulary always with you. And that's not normally what people do. Normally they spend an hour and most of it goes in one ear and out the other. So instead of this, if you found a way to record this or to keep a record of it, then all of a sudden you can go back and you can just kind of refresh yourself and you can have all that information back again because you took that time at the end of the class or at the end of the day, at the end of the session to look backwards and say, what are the takeaways here? And you keep them in your pocket for years.
Even more so in the immediate context, you should be going over those things. You should be going over them and grading yourself. You can't do that unless you're recording. So whatever you read, write something on it or speak your opinion about it or something. Record yourself talking about it. It's even better if you take a video so you can watch yourself, as painful as that is. I know, we understand it is painful to see yourself speaking in English that you know you were making so many mistakes. But the thing is, that's what other people are seeing anyway. And people are not judging you for that necessarily. They're just like, wow, you can speak a lot more English than I could speak in another language. Well done. What you need to be able to do is get over that. Get over your embarrassment and start grading yourself. Start evaluating yourself, because you will catch a lot of your mistakes if you would simply take the time to go back and watch that recording, or go back and go over your writing with a highlighter. Do something and then evaluate what you did that wasn't correct, and then try to do it again with those things in mind. And then you have that record in the future that you can refer back to so that you can see how you've grown, but you can also see that information that you've already been over.
Frankly, a lot of the times with pretty much any skill, one of the biggest determining factors of getting to fluency is just having the endurance. Having the endurance to go through day after day after day after day, trying to get to fluency. And so one of the things that is actually really amazing, if you do a good job in recording your progress, is that you get to look backwards and you see, I've progressed. I've done such a great deal. I've gone so far in my journey, looking backwards to say, I can keep going.
The last one may not be as intuitive to a lot of you, but this one is to teach English. If you're an advanced learner, you've got things that you can teach to somebody behind you. And this is one of those things that kind of surprises people because they immediately want to say, well, I don't know enough. I'm not a native speaker. I make too many mistakes or things like this. Yes. So what you need to be doing, though, is you need that accountability to really pay attention, to really think about one thing from multiple different angles. Think about different ways to explain it or to demonstrate it or to practice it. Teachers have to do this all the time. Like, as teachers, we are constantly thinking from different perspectives and angles, from different cultures, how a Spanish speaker would accept this versus how a Chinese speaker would accept this, different things that would work with different people. If you are doing that, you will be surprised at how deep your English becomes, how quickly you are able to make connections. Because what you're doing is forcing yourself to make those deep connections so that you can teach it well. And that is so important to being able to reach fluency. It's really one of those things that's overlooked way too much. Being a great teacher means you have to be an excellent student. And that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. That's not what I mean by excellent. What I mean is by being observant and really going back and checking over things and asking questions so that you can answer those questions for someone else. It's really one of the best ways to learn English.
One common thread that we see with a lot of our really excellent speaking students, a very common theme, they're all teachers to some extent. And you could say that that's kind of their job occupation, is they have to be good at English, but that's really not it. No. Really what it comes down to is that they interact with a lot of students, and those students have questions, and the teacher gets to answer those questions.
Or go look them up if they don't know, and then come back to them.
Which is normally how that works. So we as teachers, we carry the responsibility of our students' learning, but more importantly, our students kind of just move on a lot of times, right? We teach them, we do as good as a job as we can, and then they move on. But surprisingly, as we teach years and years and years later, we get a lot more questions and a lot more answers. And so for you guys, this doesn't mean monetizing your hobby. It doesn't mean monetizing English. What it does mean is to find somebody around you. It could be your kids, it could be your friends, it could be your spouse, and try to figure out a way that you can use that as a way to just practice some teaching, saying, hey, this is what I learned today. We do this even in Chinese, even now, where we try to teach somebody, say, hey, this is how you would say that in Chinese. And do they learn it? Sometimes, but more importantly, it's a refresher on me to say, remember you learned how to say that. Let's practice it again by teaching that person how to say that.
All right, guys, there you have it. Those are 5 ways to make studying English more efficient for the advanced levels and getting through those advanced levels, pushing through to fluency.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Catch you on the next one.